One is dry bulb thermometer, other one is wet bulb thermometer. The red color one is the dry bulb and blue one is wet bulb. On the basis of wet bulb and dry bulb readings, you can calculate the dew point temperature of the air. And this dew point temperature can help you to predict whether you will encounter fog or not. Welcome, adventurers. Today, let's dive into the fascinating world of a vital equipment on board called the hygrometer. This nifty instrument is like our weather companion, helping sailors to understand the air around them. Meet the hygrometer, an instrument for obtaining the relative humidity and dew point temperature of air. This type of hygrometer that is used on board merchant ships is called Mason's hygrometer or wet and dry bulb hygrometer or psychrometer. The Mason's hygrometer is housed inside the wooden box called Stephenson screen that protects the hygrometer from direct sunlight and allows the air to freely circulate through it. Hygrometer consists of two identical thermometers. One is dry bulb thermometer, other one is wet bulb thermometer. While the dry bulb thermometer stays warm, the wet bulb thermometer has a muslin cloth tied to its bulb which is dipped inside a bottle of distilled water. The dry bulb thermometer measures the atmospheric temperature. However, in case of the wet bulb thermometer, the bulb always stays wet, as through capillary action, the water is drawn upward from the bottle using this muslin cloth. Let's understand what happens in the wet bulb thermometer. If the atmosphere is dry, rapid evaporation takes place from the muslin cloth that is dipped in the distilled water. Since evaporation causes cooling, the wet bulb thermometer will show much lower reading than the dry bulb thermometer. If the atmosphere is humid, less evaporation will take place from the muslin cloth and less cooling of wet bulb will take place. So this difference between the wet bulb temperature and dry bulb temperature gives us the idea of relative humidity of the air. The greater the difference between the two temperatures, the lower will be the relative humidity and vice versa. Now let's look at the temperatures that are being recorded at this moment and try to understand how to get the relative humidity out of these readings. The red color one is the dry bulb and blue one is wet bulb. As you can see on the screen, the dry bulb temperature is 32 degrees. That means the outside temperature is 32 degrees at this moment. And the wet bulb temperature is 31 degrees. This means there is a depression of 1 degree between dry and wet bulbs. Using meteorological table which is provided on the Mason's hygrometer itself, you can then use these readings to find relative humidity. Let's do it. As the dry bulb is 32, so here on the y-axis, dry bulb temperatures are written. Here is 32, right? And depression is 1 degree. So on the x-axis are the depressions. 1 degree, 2 degree, 3 degree, whatever it is. At this moment, our depression is 1 degree. So we will read for 32 degrees of dry bulb temperature and 1 degree depression of wet bulb, the relative humidity comes out to be 93%. So in this way, we can find out what is the relative humidity basis the readings that are being shown on the hygrometer at any moment. Before moving further, let's try to understand what is dew point. If a sample of air was progressively cooled, its relative humidity would steadily increase. That is, the air would become relatively more moist. Now at some temperature, the air would become wet. That is, its relative humidity would become 100%. The air is then said to be saturated, and the temperature at which this occurs is called the dew point temperature. On the basis of wet bulb and dry bulb readings, you can calculate the dew point temperature of the air, and this dew point temperature can help you to predict whether you will encounter fog or not. Let's see how to do it. On board, there is a publication called Mariner's Handbook, NP 100, and in this publication, there are tables provided using which you can find out what is the dew point temperature. You can see there is a table which is also designed in the similar manner which we saw earlier. So you have your dry bulb temperatures on the y-axis and depression in wet bulb on the x-axis. So now our dry bulb temperature was 32 degrees and depression was 1 degree. So 1 degree is on the x-axis, depression of wet bulb. So 1 degree depression and 32 degrees dry bulb temperature gives us dew point temperature 31 degrees. So 31 degrees is the dew point temperature of present air that is outside. After this, you'll have to monitor the dew point temperature continuously for few hours, and together with that, you'll have to also take readings of the seawater temperature and plot both of them against time. As you can see in this example, dew point temperature is plotted against time for between 2100 to 2300. And similarly, sea surface temperature is also plotted. The difference in sea surface temperature and dew point temperature is narrowing down. So this gives a fair indication that if the sea surface temperature and dew point temperature becomes equal, which is happening at this point on 2300, the vessel will encounter fog. Now let's discuss some of the precautions that you'll have to take while you take your wet and dry bulb readings. This muslin cloth and distilled water must be changed at least once a week. Once you change the muslin cloth and distilled water, wait for at least 30 minutes before you take your readings. Always take your readings from the windward side. So these hygrometers are generally placed on both port and starboard side of the vessel, on the bridge wings. So you have to find out which is your windward side and take the reading on that side. And while taking the reading, position your eyes in such a way that they are at the level of the mercury. Otherwise, there will be an error of parallax and you may get a wrong reading. So dear sailors, with hygrometer on our side, we are not just sailing, we are navigating the unseen currents of air. It's more than just an equipment, a vigilant companion, guarding the ship and everything on board. That's all about the hygrometer for now. See you in another video. Thank you.